Ladies and gentlemen, today we have some absolutely monumental breaking news to talk about. You see, President Trump just absolutely cracked down on Harvard University's radically progressive agenda, and no, I'm not joking. As many of you know, for decades now, Harvard has been effectively indoctrinating students with anti-American values and suppressing conservative ideas while also promoting discriminatory DEI programs. DEI programs that, by the way, are in direct and open defiance of recent Supreme Court rulings which say that these racially discriminatory DEI policies are unconstitutional. And so, when President Trump returned to office, he signed an executive order banning DEI in every single entity across the country that receives federal funding. However, Harvard, which receives billions of dollars each year worth of taxpayer funds, chose not to comply. Instead, Harvard filed lawsuits against numerous federal agencies claiming that President Trump's executive order violated their First Amendment rights. But as we all know, this claim to free speech, as Harvard put it, is really just their last-ditch effort to continue pumping progressive propaganda into the minds of young, impressionable Americans. And so, as a result of all of this, President Trump has now frozen $2.2 billion worth of federal research grants that were Harvard-bound, and he also cut $60 million worth of Harvard's federal contracts. So what President Trump is trying to do is to get Harvard to actually obey and comply with federal law, and if they don't, well, the consequences will just continue to escalate. But so here's the unfortunate truth. Harvard's defiance proves that it's less of a neutral academic institution and more of a political entity, and so accordingly, its partisan activism and radically progressive anti-white DEI agenda should disqualify it from receiving our taxpayer money. If Harvard wants to push anti-American, anti-white propaganda, then they can pay for it themselves, but us taxpayers sure as hell aren't going to be paying their bills for them. And on top of all of this, as many of you know, for years now, Harvard's admissions and hiring practices have been prioritizing ideological conformity over actual meritocratic competence. And it's this woke agenda, backed by the Democrats, that has turned universities into what can only be described as left-wing indoctrination camps. Democrats like former President Joe Biden cheered on and paid for Harvard's radically progressive agenda, which really exposes their disdain for everything that is truly American. The far left has spent decades helping universities push the insane progressive agenda in order to undermine core American values, and so now, finally, that is coming to an end. Here's the truth. Universities like Harvard have played a massive role in spreading far-left radical ideology, which explains why now, as many of you may have noticed, it seems like half the country has lost its mind. The reality is that universities like Harvard, funded by our taxes, have been the backbone of the progressive propaganda machine, injecting toxic, radically progressive ideology into the minds of young, impressionable Americans. And so that is why President Trump's funding freeze is an absolute game changer. It holds Harvard accountable for defying federal law, and it sets a nationwide precedent. No university across the country gets to ignore America's mandate to ditch the woke agenda, not even Harvard. Now, as it relates to this entire issue, I want you all to take a look at what Education Secretary Linda McMahon had to say about all of this. But first, I do want to say real quick that if you guys enjoy the daily news updates, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. But okay, take a look at this.
Why should taxpayers continue to give money to a university that has an endowment of over $53 billion? It just doesn't make any sense, Larry. So the president's looking at their 501c3 status, and he wants them to come to the table and change things. I mean, Harvard was such a revered university, but it's not anymore. And what students are we letting in? What kind of background checks are we doing? And what kind of teachers are we letting in? I think about 3% of the faculty is conservative. The rest are not.
I'm surprised it's that good.
Yeah.
So you and the president are reviewing their tax-exempt status.
Yeah, we are. And the president, he even said the other day, hey, Why would a university that would hire Bill de Blasio and Lori Lightfoot
Can you imagine?
to do municipal government management?
Can you imagine? Right. Can you? In the middle of this whole discussion, they hired those two?
Yep.
The Professor de Blasio? Yeah. Honestly?
So he's just really looking at this very closely because he thinks it's unfair to the American taxpayer to be subsidizing this.
I mean, we were told, just the last 30 seconds, Linda, we were told, the Harvard Law School spokesperson of some kind said they insist a qualification is DEI for acceptance into Harvard Law. I mean, that is just an insult.
Well, it clearly is an insult. The president made it very clear that DEI contracts, DEI programs were to be eliminated for federal funding. And so we've been doing that in education and other agencies.
Ladies and gentlemen, did you catch all of that? Only 3% of Harvard University's faculty are conservatives. Notice how the radical progressives will scream and shout about how important diversity is, but when it comes time to diversify their workforce by including conservatives, their blatant hypocrisy gets exposed. And so this is why President Trump is also now pushing Harvard to conduct annual ideological diversity audits, which will ensure that universities like Harvard stop screwing over conservatives, ultimately ensuring fair and equal representation. And now, check this out. If Harvard continues their non-compliance, President Trump is also threatening to revoke Harvard University's tax-exempt status, which would cost them $558 million per year. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the truth. A far-left propaganda center like Harvard doesn't deserve tax breaks that are designed and intended for neutral academic institutions. But of course, Harvard is defending itself by claiming that the Trump administration is impeding on its academic freedom, but we all know that that is just a feeble effort to continue spreading their radically progressive propaganda. In truth, President Trump's reforms have completely exposed Harvard's hypocrisy, and now he's forcing them to comply with the very same federal laws that everyone else has to comply with. Here's the reality. The Trump administration's actions are protecting all students, unlike Harvard's racist DEI programs that undermine fair and equal treatment. President Trump is upholding equality of opportunity and meritocracy, while the radical progressives cling to their discriminatory agendas. And so once again, this funding freeze sends a very clear message to other universities across the country. Defy federal mandates and you will pay the price. Really, President Trump's crackdown on Harvard ensures that American taxpayers aren't bankrolling left-wing activism as we've been forced to do for decades. But of course, right now, the radical progressives are losing their minds, claiming that President Trump is attacking free speech. Here's the truth. They're just mad that, one by one, their woke indoctrination centers are getting dismantled. For decades, Democrats have spread their woke propaganda in universities across the country, working to radicalize our nation's youth. So now, as President Trump tears down and defunds their entire propaganda network, they're getting exposed for being the anti-American radicals that they really are. In the 2024 election, the American people gave President Donald Trump a mandate to clean out these woke universities, and that's exactly what he's doing. We're all fed up with universities that push radically progressive propaganda as opposed to actually educating the next generation of young Americans. And so while the Democrats have been busy pushing their racially divisive progressive agenda that does nothing other than undermine the meritocratic principles that made this country great in the first place, by cracking down on universities like Harvard, President Trump is finally restoring equality and genuine meritocracy back to our nation's universities. Here's the truth. President Trump is the first president in decades to challenge the far-left academic world head-on. Really, he's fighting for every American that's been screwed over by all of this woke insanity. And so, ladies and gentlemen, here's the final takeaway. Crushing radically progressive universities like Harvard is absolutely critical to making America great again. On taxpayer dime, they've spread toxic anti-American propaganda for decades now, and so now it's time to finally put America first. Now, ladies and gentlemen, before we wrap up, I do want to say real quick that we officially have a Morse News Twitter page as well as a Morse News Facebook page. So if you use either of those platforms, please go down below and drop a follow in order to get breaking news updates that relate to everything we talk about here in the YouTube videos. But everyone, that is going to be a wrap for today's video, so please go down below and drop a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this. Please like the video while you're down there, and like I said earlier, please consider subscribing to the channel because it really does help a ton. Thank you all very much for tuning in today, and of course, as always, stay safe.